Hey Samsung, this is Riya from Samaya, and today we are going to discuss about essay 230 audit documentation. First, quickly we'll see the summary here. You see, the summary is just contains what all the things that were discussing or that were discussed in this PDF. This is for the quick reference for the just one day before the examination. And first, we'll see the summary here. We have objectives of the auditor here. Why this under this standard, what the auditor is wanting. The objective of the auditor is to prepare documentation that provides a sufficient and appropriate record of the basis for auditor's report. What's the responsibility of the auditor? His responsibility is to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence and give an audit report on the entity's financial statements, right? You see, the documentation has to be what? Sufficient and appropriate. The audit evidence have to be sufficient and appropriate, and even the audit documentation have to be sufficient and appropriate. On which basis he provides an audit report, right? Because he what does audit documentation consists of? Audit documentation consists of audit report, audit procedures, audit evidence that were obtained, and the conclusions that were reached. On that conclusions, he gives the audit report. And second thing, as we have already discussed, audit anything that was in document provides an evidence. Evidence for what? Evidence that the audit was planned and performed in accordance with SCs. We know that audit has to be done as per SCs and other legal or regulatory requirements, if at all he is working in some specialized entities like banks, insurance, and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. So it's to provide a sufficient appropriate record and an evidence that audit was planned and done as per SCs and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Now we'll start with our audit documentation here. You see, anything that does has to have some benefits, right? Okay, why auditor has to put so much of effort or put effort to prepare audit documentation? What's the advantages of audit documentation? To plan and perform the audit, to direct and supervise the audit work, to be accountable for its work. You see, we'll boil down these 3 points into a single scenario. You see, when you say think you are an auditor or you are a senior, who gives oral instructions to your team members or your article assistants. Does this? It would be like a Chinese whisper that we have discussed in our OP, right? That we have our orientation program in our IPCC or CA Inter, right? Where a large paragraph boiled down into a four-word sentence. It shouldn't be like that. All the instructions have to be followed. When you give 10 instructions, it is not that the article assistant remember 4 to 5 and perform that. It's not that simple. So, in order to plan and perform the audit, who has to perform? That engagement team to perform. Who plans that? The engagement partner plans that. To direct and supervise the audit work. In order to direct or supervise, what you need to have? You need to have ready document for you to supervise them with that. So you need to have a written documentation form, that's audit documentation, to be accountable for its work. You see, all the audit documentation also involves audit procedures that were performed. It also includes the matters who have performed the audit, which makes the audit team accountable. So these three things were boiled down to this point, this situation where the engagement partner gives audit instructions or audit procedures to its teammates to plan and perform the audit. Second thing, to direct and supervise. After giving some instructions, we have to direct them and supervise how the work is done. And third thing is with regards to audit team members, engagement team members to be accountable for their work. Third thing, retaining a record, and fourth thing, the retaining a record of matters of continuing significance to future audits. We have moved to next year now. There's a little bit progress had happened. We have been seniors now, and our juniors will see how we have performed the audit for their future reference, future audits. And the next one is enabling the conduct of quality control reviews and inspections, and enabling the conduct of external inspection like QCR and like peer review, quality control reviews, etc. They're talking about this. You see, audit firm also have to report to few authorities on how the quality control procedures that were being performed in its audit engagement, like peer review that you have got. Obviously, peer review have got so many amendments this time. We need to check out the audit amendments video there. But and Moving on to here, enabling the conduct of quality controls and inspection and external inspections. And that's it. These were the advantages of audit documentation, that scenario, to plan the audit and for the future reference, and few inspections and reviews. And timely preparation of audit documentation. How the audit documentation be documented? It have to be documented in a timely manner. Timely manner is as soon as possible or immediately. Preparing sufficient and appropriate audit documentation. Whenever you have to describe an audit documentation, you have to describe it as sufficient and appropriate audit documentation on a timely basis to enhance the quality of the audit. You see, audit documentation enhances the quality of the audit. As we have already discussed here, when you give 10 instructions, the engagement team does 4 to 5, it is not a quality audit, right? They have to do all the 10 on 10. That's what quality of the audit lies there. It also facilitates the effective review, evaluation of the audit evidence obtained and conclusions reached before auditor's report is finalized. That is to review the audit evidence and review the conclusions, evaluate the conclusions. See, what's the responsibility of the auditor again? To give an audit report on the conclusion, on the audit evidence that he had obtained, right? In order to give an audit report, what you have to do? You have to review the audit evidence and evaluate the conclusions that were reached from the audit evidence, and an appropriate time limit within which to complete the assembly of final audit file, that is final assembly, is ordinarily not more than 60 days after the date of auditor's report. After the auditor had signed the audit report, within 60 days, there have to be final assembly of the audit documentation. This is widely tested in an MCQ. We'll see also the linked portion here. What are the changes made to audit documentation during the final assembly process? This is also an important question. This is a category question in this A20 SA 230 audit documentation. You see, after completion of all the audit procedures and everything, what are the things you have to do while final assembly of the audit? You see, auditor is, when he's signing the audit report, if by that time all the audit procedures should have been performed, all the disagreements have been reached into a conclusion, right? What have to do in the final assembly process? We have to sort things out and have to delete some files, or they have to eliminate or discard few unnecessary things. But at the final assembly process, you cannot go and do the depreciation calculations or assessment of risk there. This audit was completed here. After that, what you could do? You could delete or discard superseded documentation. What are superseded documentation? You see, audit is a process, right? You think of audit as a 10-step process. Audit is a 10 days process. You have got some information on day 3, and you have got some information on day 7 on the same aspect as on the day 3, that is superseding, that is overriding the information, or in addition to that, where your conclusions or where your thinking process gets changed or gets into another direction. So with which information you will give more weight to, on day 3 or day 7? Obviously day 7, right? Day 3 were the superseded documentation, or all the documentations, all the conclusions reached in or day 3 were superseded by day 7. That is what superseded documentations were. Deleting and discarding such superseded documentation, and sorting, collating, and cross-referencing working papers. And you have to collate the working papers. Collating is like combining two different audit working papers into a single set, where like someone who had physically verified the assets of the entity and someone who had verified the accounting depreciation or depreciation, we have to combine them and sort them and cross-reference those working papers, and signing off on completion of checklist. As we have already discussed, they have given 10 instructions, out of which 10 on 10 has to be done. You have to sign that all the 10 have, or 10 on 10 have to be had done by that engagement team head. And documenting audit evidence that auditor has obtained, discussed, agreed with the relevant members of the engagement team before the date of the audit report. What we should not have any disagreements with the EQCR he is taking a reference of, or auditors experts or management or audit team engagement members, audit engagement team members. We have to reach some conclusions. You have to document those things. These were all the things that would be changed in the final assembly process. What are the things? Deleting and discarding superseded documentation, sorting, collating, and cross-referencing working papers, signing a checklist, and documenting audit evidence that were obtained by the engagement team. And now we'll discuss the form. We'll see audit documentation have to be done in which form, what all the content should be in the audit documentation, and till what extent the audit documentation have to be done. You see, there were two parties, the auditor and the client. We have to check both the categories which would influence the audit documentation. First, all the size and complexity or the nature of the client has to be first influence the audit documentation. Second thing, what are all the audit procedures that were done by the auditor also influence the audit documentation. This is what before preparation of the audit. But while during the preparation, while during the audit, what influences the audit documentation or audit evidence? All the significant matters, if at all any fraud or material misstatements that had happened, these things influence the audit documentation. This first we'll see what are the things that influences the form, content, and extent of audit documentation. The size and complexity of the entity, on how big the entity was, or how complex the transactions in the entity was, influences the audit documentation. The nature of the audit procedures performed. These also we have discussed. This is with regards to the client, with regards to the auditor before the audit. The identifying risk of material misstatements while during the audit, while doing the audit. The significance of audit evidence that was obtained. How significant the audit evidence is. If it's from third party or it's being contradictory to the audit evidence that were already obtained, it also influences the audit report, audit documentation. The need to document a conclusion. As we have seen here, we have to review the audit evidence and then obtain conclusions. Whenever you obtain an audit evidence, you have to also document how you have reached the conclusion. There's a flow chart type because we have reached this so and so audit evidence and we have reached this so and so written representations and external confirmations. It is being concluded that we have to reach conclusions like that for future reference audit, for future audits reference. And the audit documentation is obviously the property of the auditor, and that's it. And we'll see what all the things that we could document, what all the things we call it as an audit documentation, the audit programs, that what the instructions that engagement partner had given to his team members, analysis, it's like analytical procedures and analyzing how the internal controls were being performed, etc. on the accounting process, etc. Issues memoranda. Issues memoranda is something a brief summary or brief description. Issues is problems that you find in the entity. So it's a brief description of the problems or irregularities that you find. Summaries of significant matters and letters of confirmations and written representation, letter of confirmations from third parties and written representations from the management, and then checklists. These are all few examples of audit documentation. These all together constitutes audit documentation. Audit need not include superseded drafts of the working papers. As we have already discussed superseded drafts, right? These need not be included. You could delete those superseded documents. Oral explanations by auditor do not represent adequate support for the work auditor performed or conclusions the auditor reached. What they are saying is they are emphasizing that the audit documentation have to be in a written format. Oral explanations do not represent adequate support for the work auditor performed. Now we'll see documentation of significant matters. As we have seen here, he has to, here. Audit documentation includes summaries of significant matters, right? We'll see what are those significant matters. You see, whenever there's any kind of question that rises, you have to think from both perspectives to write your audit answer completely. First, with respect to the entity and with respect to the auditor. With regards to entity, what we see the risk and internal control procedures, etc. Right? And therefore, with regards to the auditor, what we check how the audit procedures were being performed, and we'll keeping those two things in mind, we'll just figure out what all the documentations of significant matters could be. Matters that give rise to significant risk. Okay, they're talking about the entity here, the significant risk. Circumstances that cause auditors significant difficulty in applying necessary audit procedures, like limitation of scope. that was infused by the management or something other. They're, they're restricting the auditor in performing the audit procedures. They're talking about the auditor here. Okay. Findings that would result in modification to the audit opinion. Again, they're talking about the auditor. After doing some audit procedure, if there was any kind of limitation of scope, what he has to do? He has to modify the opinion or provide a disclaimer of opinion, right? That's what they're talking about. That's the duty of the auditor. So why have auditor had gone to the entity to give an audit report on how the financial statements were prepared by doing some audit procedures. We see here he had got some significant difficulty in applying necessary audit procedures. So what he have to do? He have to do some modifications to the audit opinion, whether giving a qualified opinion or doing a disclaimer of opinion, anything. This all both deals about the auditor. And the results of audit procedures indicating that, okay, here he had got some significant difficulty in applying audit procedure, but he had done some audit procedures. But what that results is, that results that financial statements are materially misstated. Okay, when the financial statements are materially misstated and a need to revise auditor's previous assessment of risk of material misstatement. That is, we have obtained some audit evidence which is contradictory to the audit evidence that had previously obtained. So he has to, or he had came to know that the management were involved in some frauds and they do not have integrity, and have to re-evaluate the risk of material misstatements that he has done at the planning stage of the audit. So what are the documents, what are the significant matters, what are the things we have to document? Significant risk, all the circumstances that cause difficulty in applying the audit procedure, and all the findings that could result in modification of opinion. And if after he done the audit procedures, that results in that the financial statements were materially misstated, and his assessment of risk of material misstatement has to be revised. And with regards to completion memorandum, as we have described, a summary or description. The auditor may retain as a part of audit documentation a summary that describes the significant matters identified during the audit and how they were addressed. And also, we also have done something like completion memorandum, right? In our keyword kits, right? We have taken some issues with regards to fraud or that's happening or any deficiencies on how to communicate. We have formed an outline on how to write answers in audit, right? Likewise, the auditor also gives an outline on how to address the significant matters that he had found. The auditor may retain a portion that describes the significant matters, that's what we have also already described there, and identify on how they have to be addressed, how the audit procedure have to be performed and how they have to be addressed. And I think this we have discussed this changes to the final assembly process, and that's it. We have completed our SA 230. Happy learning. Please leave a like and do share.